And for the first time, one of the cases appear not to have traveled out of Ghana. We have details. We are also live in Parliament tonight where there are disagreements over the emergency legislation imposing restrictions on movement.
The bill has to be withdrawn. The memorandum has to be improved to accommodate COVID-19 and other emergency situations.
Any person who thinks that what we are doing is a nullity can go and challenge it in court.
Meanwhile, it is emerging tonight that several members of parliament will have to go into self-quarantine after the return from coronavirus-affected countries. Plus the story of the husband of Communications Minister Eslo Usu Ekufo, who is currently in self-isolation.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Bond Savings and Loans. Your success, our passion, also brought to you by Gasem Cement, the nation builder, and Vodafone. The future is exciting. Ready. From the initial two cases exactly a week ago today, Ghana has in the last couple of hours confirmed the rise in the coronavirus cases to 11. And for the first time, the Ghana Health Service update on one of the latest cases did not indicate a travel history. Only to note that that case was a trader resident in Kumasi. Head of our health desk, Fred Smith, joins me in the studio with details. Fred, what more do we know about this Kumasi confirmed case?
Well, a 61-year-old Lebanese male trader, as you mentioned, he felt unwell, reported to a health facility with fever. The temperature was 39.4 degrees Celsius and he was coughing. The samples were taken, tested, and it turned out positive. Okay,
so that's what officially has been communicated to us. He's a Lebanese, he's a trader in Kumasi. What was left out, and this, Fred, it has to be noted, is the first time since the first two cases emerged last week, exactly a week ago today, that in communicating the confirmed case, they leave out the travel history.
Indeed.
And so that's a significant one. We'll try and dig into what that means right now shortly with an expert. But there is more information, Fred, however, on the other case, the other case that was confirmed today.
Yes, indeed. It's a 59-year-old Ghanaian woman. She's resident in the United Kingdom and recently returned to Ghana and currently living in Kumasi. She reported to a private health facility with the history of fever, and the temperature was 39.1 degrees Celsius, and she was coughing as well, had running nose, and her condition was suspected to be COVID-19. Samples were taken and sent to KCCR, and the report indicated that she was COVID-19 positive.
Okay, so that's the first. So this is a clear case of an imported case.
Indeed, there's indication that she had traveled from the United Kingdom into Ghana.
Okay. How are they faring? Did they give indication how they're holding up, these two?
Yes, indeed. The statement says that the two are doing well in isolation. They are responding to treatment.
Okay. And do we know what the contacts are now for those cases confirmed?
Well, with regards to contact tracing for the entire cases that we've recorded so far, it's up to 399 contacts, and they have been identified and are being followed up. 19 of those contacts have developed some forms of symptoms, and samples have already been taken for laboratory testing, and results have come for 15 of them. They are all negative, and 4 are still outstanding. The contact identification and tracking for newly confirmed cases have also started.
Okay. Fred, thank you very much for that quick update, and this is according to the Ghana Health Service. We keep monitoring that live page. Once we get any updates from there, we will definitely bring it to you. But I want to bring in right now Dr. Michael Owusu. He's a research scientist, Department of Medical Diagnostics, KNUST, researcher also at the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research, KCCR. Thank you, sir, for your time. Dr. Michael Owusu, here on Top Story.
Thank you very much, Evan.
I'm grateful that you could join us. If you can help us first understand this. This is for the first time in a week since we started recording confirmed cases. This 11th case, the Ghana Health Service did not indicate the person's travel history. The only thing they say is he's a trader in Kumasi and also is a Lebanese. From an expert point of view, what's your own understanding of that? What does that indicate?
A very good evening to your listeners, and I wish everybody well. So, Evans, this is quite a bit worrying to me, and from an expert point of view, if you have followed through all the 10 cases where the Ghana Health Service was able to specifically tell us where the people came from, so you could classify all the 10 as imported cases. But for the very one who is a Lebanese, you could see that the information is not that detailed, which means that we don't seem to know, perhaps not aware of the status of this very person. And this is where what becomes worrying. Normally, there are two levels of transmission of this disease. The first level is the imported level, where cases are imported, they are managed, their contacts are followed up, and the contacts are managed.
Doc, forgive me. The first level, I'll come to that, but I'm hearing some interference in the line. I don't know if because of where you are or you can reposition. It's just something is interfering with the line. It's I think I've lost it. Can you hear me, sir?
Hello, Evans.
I can hear you loud and clear. Yes, I think it's gone now.
Yeah, is it okay now?
It is better. Yes.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that there are two levels of this that a country deals with. The first level is dealing with imported cases, right? So cases come in, you identify these cases, you follow them up. If they develop symptoms, you test, and if they are positive, you follow their contacts, and then trace these contacts. If they also become positive, you test them and manage them. Now, the second level is the community transmission level, where individuals in the community are exposed, and then they also transmit to others. So if you look at the 11 cases that have been reported, for 10 of them, it's clearly stated where they came from. It means that we know that they are imported. But for this very last case, which is the Lebanese case, the information is not that detailed, which means that it's not very clear, which raises a quite worrying concern. Because it means that you can't tell that the patient has traveled in. It looks as if he's a resident in Kumasi and a trader and tested positive. So the very source, the primary source of exposure of this patient is a bit worrying. What you want to call the patient zero. Where did this Lebanese patient get this disease from? Is it that he spoke or got in contact with somebody who has traveled in? Is it that he was engaged in trading and was exposed to another person? These are questions that you begin to cause some of us to think through that. Is it possible there is an ongoing community transmission? That somebody who is called a patient zero is now spreading it, and by chance or by whatever means, this Lebanese has been exposed.
You say if that is the case, then it's worrying. Why?
It's worrying because a community transmission, when you have outbreaks like this, you make sure you know who has the disease. You quarantine the person. If he has the symptoms, you isolate the person, you manage the person. And when the person recovers, you retest. If he's negative and free of the virus, you release the person into the community. So this Chinese has the virus. The question is that we don't have information, but he has not traveled from outside. It means he has no travel history. So it means he perhaps contracted it from a patient, or not a patient, but somebody. And for that person, you don't know who the person is. If you know who the person is, then that person becomes the primary case that you have to follow up. But if you don't know the person, then it means that you have to ensure that you find that very source patient, identify the patient, quarantine the patient, test the patient, and then manage the patient as such. If you don't find the source, then it means the person will go ahead and then spark what you call community transmission. I mean, many of those who come into contact with the person will end up getting the disease.
So we obviously need some further clarity from the Ghana Health Service on this. Then I mean we've been trying to reach them all the last 2 hours since this was updated to get clarity on this. I guess Dr. Usu, what this means is that as WHO is advising, plan for the worst. If you take in that advice, it means that we should operate as if community spreading is happening. That means extra precautions will have to be taken if you live in Kumasi or wherever it is you're in Ghana. Is that a good approach to take now and get the public to know so that we all start taking extra measures? Those who are taking it for granted can then, I guess, get on board.
Yeah, so from the public perspective, you will have to take precautionary measures that will seem as if there is a community transmission. We don't have official information yet. As I said, the statements put out on the website is quite scanty. So you will need the Ghana Health Service to further tell us whether this is community transmission, who exposed this Lebanese. But for us in the public, because of this limited information, it means that you may never know. So you will have to adhere to all the precautionary measures and ensure that you take all the advice that has been given out there. Because whoever comes to you will be a potential person. If this turns out to be community, then this is where we will go or where we head to.
Doc, I'm grateful. Just before we go, as we always do, now that we are talking about the possibility of community spreading of this disease, just highlight for you the most important tips for members of the public tonight, now that we're beginning to have a conversation about 11th case that may have been had no travel history possibly, and community spreading may be happening. What for you are the top tips now to do?
So what the directive by the president to me is what we have to all adhere to. Large crowd gathering is the number one risk factor for quick transmission of the disease. So avoiding large gatherings from the church's perspective, from the mosque, from the football field, from the funerals, from all these gatherings are things that we should adhere to strictly. Ensuring that you undertake good hygienic practices, so washing your hands intermittently, using alcohol-based gel more than 60% or 70%, which is very good, and then ensuring that even if you are coughing, so at this level, it means that if you are not sure of yourself, you have come into contact with a potential case, you call the hotline and ensure that the health workers come to you and collect your sample and quarantine yourself. And for us as Ghanaians, we are heavily relying on the sincerity of people, that people must be truthful to themselves. If they are exposed, they quarantine themselves because you don't have the security coming to monitor you, whether you do the right thing or not. But then if you don't behave yourself well, you expose everybody. So people must adhere to the precautions, but then should be willing to cooperate with the health professionals in dealing with this case.
Doc, I'm grateful that you joined me. Dr. Michael Owusu is a research scientist, Department of Medical Diagnostics, KNUST, researcher, also at the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research, KCCR. And by the way, that is an institution, there's a second institution in Ghana, only two institutions, Noguchi and KCCR. They are mandated to test for coronavirus. So he knows what he's talking about. And so take the precautions, take this seriously. We are at the point now where you simply have to take this seriously. The WHO says you need to act as if the next person close to you has it. That's the only way you can protect yourself. Take that advice he's just giving. The WHO is also giving that. Countries should prepare as if they have it. I want to go to Parliament now, where it is emerging that a number of MPs will have to self-quarantine because of fears they may have been exposed after returning from coronavirus-affected countries. Parliamentary correspondent Joseph Gakpo is on the line with me. Joseph, who are these MPs?
So, two of them, Dr. Robert Kwanleb, who is the Member of Parliament for Binduri, and he's also the Deputy Ranking Member on the Health Committee of Parliament, as well as Nessa Mahama Ture, who is the Member of Parliament for Ayawasu East. Now, the majority leader, Evans Mensah, disclosed those two names on the floor. He gave the indication that with regards to Dr. Robert Kwanleb, he traveled out of the country to Tokyo. He's back in the jurisdiction. He came on board an Ethiopian Airlines flight, and the speaker, the majority leader, Evans Mensah's indication was that it should be communicated to him that he should stay off the House. And then the second MP, Mr. Mahama Toure, the majority leader, indicated that he will be arriving tomorrow from India. And again, that communication should go to him. And also, he mentioned the names of 5 staff members here in Parliament. There are staff workers here, 5 of them that he said himself and their spouses have been to Nigeria, and that they've also been asked that they shouldn't show up here in Parliament at any point in time.
There are some staff members who are also being advised to stay out, including some of them, including their spouses. The advice is that people should stay outside for the time being before Nigeria. They'll be given a certificate of prayer to come back.
And that is the majority leader there. Joseph, thankfully, the health minister was in Parliament when this disclosure was made. What was his reaction?
It started off with the first Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Joseph Ewuzu, asking that he thought there is some form of arrangement that when people return from affected countries, then something needs to be done. And the Health Minister, Kukwajiman Menu, who was on the floor, indicated that those details of the individuals that have been given to him, that had actually been mentioned right on the floor of Parliament, he is requesting those details, the names of the people, their contacts, and the other details, so that then he would pass it on to the public health officials who are in charge of helping with various isolation processes. So as soon as possible, we can get those people into isolation so they don't infect others.
We want to take their details and their contact numbers to pass it on to our workers who are doing this work, to be tracing and let them find them. And if they meet them even at the airports, they will guide them to their homes and consult what them for 2 weeks. But the Speaker, I think it's good for only our colleagues who are coming. All of us, even if they are not traveled, and we have cause to believe that they are coming to contact with somebody who might have been diagnosed, you don't need anybody to ask you to go into self-quarantine. You should do that voluntarily, so that you take yourself from the challenge that we have. The disease is not very, 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 very fatal, but the rate at which it spreads is quite very frightening, and therefore we should all take ourselves away from contact.
And Joseph, very quickly, another member of Parliament, Minister for Communications, Esla Wusu, made a disclosure today to members of the press about her own husband. What is that? What is that?
That conversation actually also started on the floor, and the disclosure is that the husband had been out of the country. He returned from the United Kingdom about 2 days ago. She says he's not showing any signs or symptoms of the disease, but then as a precautionary measure, they've gotten him into self-isolation, and he's in quarantine in an enclave in the house. Food is being passed on to him. Water is being passed on to him. No one is getting close to him physically. He waves people from a distance, and they are counting down over the next 14 days to see if he shows signs or otherwise. And she just told that story, even on the floor, just to make the point that all individuals who have been in affected areas should endeavor to get themselves into self-quarantine so they don't endanger other members of the public.
My own husband returned from the UK 2 days ago, and as soon as he came from the airport, the UK is suffering from all that, and in the nature of his job, he examines people closely in their eyes, and so he may unwittingly have come into contact with this virus. We are not saying that he does, but to err on the side of caution, he is in self-isolation, even though he hasn't seen his family for a few weeks, but he's in self-isolation. And as soon as he came from the airport, he went straight to the room which had been prepared for him. He has everything there. He is not having any contact at all with anybody in the house. They leave his food at the door. If we want to talk to him, we stand at the door and a safe distance away from him and talk to him. We wave him. He's okay. He has his computer. He's watching television. He has his phone. So he's keeping himself busy and doing the stuff that he needs to do. But without having physical contact with anybody in the house. Touch wood. If in case he has been infected, and we hope that nothing like that has happened. But we wouldn't know while he is asymptomatic whether he has been infected or not. And now we've had 9 people in this country. They've come into contact 11 people in this country who've come into contact with several people. So if you know anybody at all who has been diagnosed of this illness, please, you yourself, protect your family and protect your community by going into self-isolation.
And I will stay in Parliament because there are tonight disagreements over the emergency legislation introduced by the Attorney General today in the House. Remember that the President has over the weekend announced a raft of new measures to restrict movement. Now, that was supposed to have been backed by emergency legislation that went to Parliament today. The minority side in Parliament are disagreeing with the Attorney General on the terms of that particular legislation. If you've not been following it, I'm going to bring you very, very quickly a detail of what exactly the Attorney General is proposing in this particular legislation very shortly. But in the House today, there have been heated disagreements over the text of that particular legislation, which is splitting heads in Parliament already. I'm joined online shortly by Dominic Ayine, who is obviously a former Deputy Attorney General. Mr. Ayine, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you. Just before we go into the details of this, I want just to share with the public excerpts of the legislation that the Attorney General introduced today.
Public gathering, including
President Akufo-Addo announcing he had asked the Attorney General to ensure that a law is laid before Parliament in accordance with Article 21 to give legal backing to his directives on public gatherings.
I've directed the Attorney General to submit immediately to Parliament emergency legislation in accordance with Article 21, 4C and D of the Constitution of the Republic to embody these measures.
The memorandum of the bill explains what it seeks to achieve.
The purpose of the bill is to provide powers to impose restrictions on persons in the event of a disaster, emergency, or similar circumstances to ensure public safety and protection.
It continues.
Government finds it expedient to develop a legal framework to provide generally for expeditious interventions by the government in the event of an unforeseeable emergency.
Clause 3 of the bill lists the restrictions the President may impose.
Restrictions in the interest of defense, public safety, public health, or running of essential services. Restrictions reasonably required on movement or residence within Ghana and entry into Ghana.
Clause 3D is what some NDC MPs find worrying. It reads,
the restriction is reasonably required for the purpose of safeguarding the people of Ghana against the teaching or propagation of doctrine which exhibits or discourages disrespect for nationhood of Ghana, the national symbols and emblems, or incites hatred against other members of the community.
Minority Chief Whip Muntaka Mubarak says this is unacceptable.
I mean, there's no mention of coronavirus, and I also think it's too broad, and it's like wanting to give the president an unlimited or a blank check. I don't think that's good for our democracy.
It's worth noting that the 5-page bill is largely a reproduction of Article 21 of the Constitution. The controversial Clause 3D is actually a reproduction of Article 21, Clause 4, subsection C of the 1992 Constitution. It remains to be seen what changes Parliament will make once it begins consideration of the bill.
Dr. Ayine, this is partly a reproduction of the Constitution. So what's the concern there from the minority?
Okay, thank you very much. Our concerns are principally three. The first one is that we are not against the enactment of laws, narrowly tailored to dealing with the coronavirus. Okay, so if the president had brought a bill that focused narrowly on dealing with this public health crisis that we are facing globally, and then also in this country, we would have been the first to support it. But this bill does not deal with the public health, does not deal directly with the public health crisis that, faces the nation. It is rather a broad grant of executive powers to the president, and in fact, even a combination of executive and legislative powers to the president to restrict freedoms, including freedom of movement, even freedom of speech and of thought. And this is where we have a problem. It is not narrowly tailored to deal with the coronavirus. We are also concerned about its constitutionality. The bill is patently unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional because it seeks to enact into law emergency measures that directly, run against the grain of the constitutional safeguards under Article 31 of the Constitution. So they are trying to, go around the state of emergency provisions of the Constitution by enacting the exceptions to the human rights regime under Chapter 5, into law. Now, let me ask you a question. Why would you, in the face of Article 21, reenact the Constitution into a statute? That doesn't make sense. It's an inefficient use of parliamentary time for us to reenact the language of Article 21 into a statute, and then add into that a provision that says that the president, when he determines in his own wisdom, that a crime has been committed, then he can then impose penalties. Now, this runs against Article 19 clause 11 of the Constitution, because that requires that before anybody can be charged with a criminal offense, that crime must have been defined by law, and the punishment for the crime known beforehand. And so our second concern is the constitutionality of the bill that is brought. In fact, we are saying that it is patently unconstitutional and there on arrival. But of course, Parliament is a master of its own procedure. Parliament can go ahead and then enact this law. But ultimately, if it is challenged in the Supreme Court, we are very hopeful that the court will declare it unconstitutional. Our third concern is that it is legally unnecessary, because there is a whole raft of laws in place to deal with the emergency, the exercise of emergency powers. I'll just give you a few examples. Take a look at the Public Health Act that was passed by Parliament. In that act, specifically in Section 169, there are powers vested in the Minister of Health to deal with matters relating to the movement of persons during a public health crisis, such as the coronavirus, epidemic that we are faced now. So the Minister of Health can by regulations or by a declaration quarantine people, without recourse to the human rights regime under Article 21. Under Chapter 5 of the Constitution. That is what was contemplated by the drafters of the Constitution when they gave those exceptions in Article 21. Not the fact that you can just reenact them into law and then give the president broad powers to restrict movement. All right, so that is the Public Health Act. We also have the Emergency Powers Act, which deals with the exercise of presidential power or executive authority during times of emergency that may include restriction of movement. All right. Then also we have the criminal laws of this country. Under Act 21, Act 29, if you desecrate a national emblem, all right, specifically under Section 4, if you desecrate a national emblem, that is an offense punishable by law. So why are we reenacting Article 21 into law and making it, giving the president powers to deal with persons whose conduct desecrate the national symbols or national emblems? And by the way, what has that got to do with what do you call it?
Coronavirus. Okay. Now,
so if you are saying that you are bringing these restrictions, the imposition of restrictions bill, in order to deal with the public health crisis that we are faced with now, all right, why enact legislation that gives you power
Okay. I mean, there's a lot you said that we need to unpack because of the uncertain, unusual, abnormal times we're in. Stay on the line for me briefly. I want to quickly return to that in detail. Hold on. You've just been listening there to Dr. Dominic Iyine. We're going to go back to Parliament very shortly because this is currently a subject of parliamentary consideration. My colleague, Joseph Gakpo, will also join me. Newsnight starts right now.